girls, huh? Well, JC, I promised everybody yesterday that we were going to talk about a constitutional sheriff today.
Do it.
And we're going to do a Liberty First University class right here online.
Well, it's important in some of these things because, you know, like the quarantines and closing businesses and things that are actually not lawful, not constitutional, and not even lawful in many states.
Right.
This would be an area where sheriffs can stand up and say, no, we're not going to allow you to do that here.
And so we were meeting with some people the other day, and I was explaining about how I do this teaching all across the country to the sheriffs. Remember, you know, those of you who've been with us for a long time, you know, I just got back from Reno teaching the course for the sheriffs to the sheriffs of 17 states in the Western Sheriffs Association. 3 hours. I mean, that's serious. And they wouldn't let me take a break, JC. We went 3 hours straight. It was phenomenal. We're not doing 3 hours today. We're just doing a segment of the class today. And it has to do with the history of the sheriff. And you know, Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's a lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Because the history is our teacher, and it actually is the wisdom that our framers used to create the government that we have today. And the people we were meeting with, I was explaining to this the power of the sheriff and how it's not only the power of the sheriff, but it's the duty of the sheriff to stand up against governments, against not just criminals, but to governments as well. Let me start off by sharing. Somebody had mentioned Brad Rogers up here. And I just want to share with you something that Brad Rogers wrote, because the question was, KrisAnne, how do we show these sheriffs, how do we make them know this? You know, how many sheriffs know this? How do they know this? How do we do this? Well, we have to teach them. We have to teach our sheriffs. But we do have, and one thing I was telling them is we have a large number of sheriffs that are solid out there. Mm-hmm. You just don't get to hear about them in the news because CNN's not going to cover this kind of stuff. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News isn't going to cover when a sheriff is successful in shutting out the federal government. Now, Brad Rogers used to be the sheriff of Elkhart, Indiana. Now, I say used to, not because he didn't get reelected, but because he termed out. So Indiana has term limits for their sheriffs, and he termed out. But his undersheriff, he was so popular that his undersheriff became the sheriff.
Nice.
Yeah. And so what Brad Rogers in Elkhart, Indiana, he was having a trouble with the USDA and the FDA coming in and raiding his Amish farmers in the dark of the night over weapons of mass destruction, you know, raw eggs, milk, and cheese, right? And so Brad Rogers got so sick and tired of the tyranny of the USDA and the FDA that he penned a letter, and he sent a letter to the USDA, told them to share it with the FDA, and basically told them, if you come into my county again to effectuate any of your federal, to serve any of you, effectuate, that's one of those lawyer terms, to serve any of your federal warrants without coming to my office first and getting my express permission. He told the USDA and the FDA, you will have to pick up your agents in my jail because I'm going to arrest them for trespass. Are you catching that? The sheriff is threatening to arrest federal agents for trespass if they don't give his permission to issue a warrant. Now, this was years ago. You never saw federal troops marching into Elkhart, Indiana, or the president trying to put Brad Rogers in prison, or congressmen having some congressional hearing over it. They wanted this to be quiet. Mm-hmm. Because the truth of the matter is, Brad Rogers never had another problem with the USDA or the FDA. Now, I want to share with you what the response in public was so overwhelming that he did a press release. And I want to share with you the press release because it helps us understand why this lesson on the constitutional sheriff is so important. He says, and I'm quoting, "Your local elected officials can stem the tide of federal overreach if they apply just a little backbone in supporting and defending the Constitution. In big capital letters, he says, expect it, demand it. He says, some bloggers and natural food writers have hailed me as a hero because he was defending the property rights of raw milk and cheese. And he says, I'm no hero. I'm just doing my job. How can our sheriffs do their job if they don't even know what their job is?
Right.
And Brad Rogers knew what his job was. He says, whether you're a conservative, here's his job. Are you ready? Everybody, if you're taking notes, if you're recording this, record it right now. This is the job description of your sheriff. Are you ready? Whether you are a conservative or a liberal, I will be a guardian of the Constitution for you. And I will not stand idly by while the rights of my county are trampled, whether by criminals or an overreaching government.
Yeah.
That is the job description of your sheriff.
And
that is the first and foremost job description of your sheriff.
And you have kind of a sort of photo negative example, right? The bad side of what happens and how bad can it get when you don't have a constitutional sheriff. You have the other extreme when you see what happened to Lavoy Finicum.
Absolutely.
Like if you had a sheriff like Brad Rogers,
right,
he'd be alive today. But you have a guy there. I mean, so it shows, I think, how important this is.
Yeah, and your sheriff, this is not KrisAnne Hall's opinion. This is actual legal fact. Your sheriff is the top legal authority in your county. Your sheriff is above the governor, above your county commission. He's above the state police. He's above the president. He's above the FBI. He's above the military in your county. There is no higher authority, legally speaking, in your county than the sheriff, which is why. Now, this applies, let me just give you this sort of legal disclaimer. This only applies to the sheriffs where the people have protected the sheriff's power.
Yeah, because the word got out about these principles.
Yes.
In Delaware.
Yeah.
What was that? Biden's son moved to change it, to make sure.
Stripped the sheriffs of Delaware of their arrest authority. Even a sheriff is just simply a guy who serves warrants and post eviction notices on the doors, and he doesn't do anything. But the sheriff, in the places where the sheriff's authority is true and protected, the sheriff is a constitutionally elected officer, a representative of the people. Now, I want to mention to you from an historical perspective, this didn't happen by accident, right? We didn't just say, oh, let's create this office of a sheriff and let's make the sheriff, the guy who's supposed to protect the rights of the people. That's not how it works. The sheriff is actually the guy who started off in history as an agent of the king. So in 1849, under the king of England by the name of where is my brain? King, there he is, Alfred. I was going to say Alfred, but I forgot. Under King Alfred, a sheriff was a representative of the royal authority at the local level. Now, in 849, we didn't have counties. We had these things called shires. And the sheriff was called a reeve. Just so you know, that's where you get the term sheriff. It's a phonetical blending of the words shire reeve. So you say that long enough with a heavy English accent, and you get sheriff.
Yeah, you still have there are you still have towns and cities in the Northeast that harken back to that language. Like names that end in shire. Right. New Hampshire. I mean, the whole state still has that.
Right. Exactly.
That kind of, and I think Worcester. Some of those that are like Worcester, some of that still that Chester.
Worcester. I got so corrected when I said Worcester. No, it's not Worcester. It's
Worcester.
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 You knew you lived around Baltimore.
Yeah.
Baltimore.
Worcestershire sauce.
Worcestershire. Okay, so the sheriff was the highest authority and the senior official only under the king himself. So he was a hireling of the king. Now, remember the class that I just gave online on the history of the Constitution. So what you have to realize is that this starts in 849. The sheriff, the shire reeve, is a hireling of the king. And so just as a review for this, we then have the Ethelred Agreement in 1014, where we create the limited monarchy. Then we have Edward the Confessor. You guys will remember through that class. By the way, if you haven't had the class and you missed the class on YouTube, the constitutional class is still on YouTube, and you can always become a student at libertyfirstuniversity.com and get these classes on your own and study at your own time. And we always do them in greater detail at libertyfirstuniversity.com as well. All right, so then you have Edward the Confessor. Remember, he's the generous king. Then you have William I, the tyrant king, the one who said that he was going to overturn the government without the people knowing, fundamentally transform. Then we get his son, William II, the red hairy guy, and then his other son, Henry I. We get the 1100 Charter of Liberties. We're fast forwarding through this because you've already had this class, but you get the 1100 Charter of Liberties, the first promise, the first written promise to the people that the government will not be evil and oppressive anymore. By the way, just a little bit of trivia for you and a reminder, the 1100 Charter of Liberties is where we have codified our principles of separation of church and state, which is going to be very important for us when we have these lockdowns, separation of church and state, okay? Then we're going to now come to the year 1215. We have a rebellion against John. Remember, John is the massive taxation king. And remember the Disney movie of Robin Hood, right? The sheriff of Nottingham, in the Robin Hood story, not just in Disney, but anyway, the sheriff of Nottingham worked for the king. Well, when the rebellion comes against John, and the people force the Magna Carta on John, the entire role of the sheriff changes. In 1215, under Clause 61 of the Magna Carta, the sheriff is no longer a hireling of the government. He is no longer working for the king. The sheriff now works for the people. Now, I want to take a few minutes. I don't like reading a lot on the show, but I want to read to you the part of Clause 61 of the Magna Carta, because this portion of the Clause 61 of Magna Carta, this transformation of the shire reeve into the sheriff that we know today, tells us explicitly what our sheriff is supposed to be doing, all the way back in 1215. Now, when we read this, it's written in the first person because the king is signing a promise. So when we start off and it says, if we are chief justices, our officials, and any of our servants, okay, we say that, right? Well, he's talking about the royalty, the king and the crown. So if we, the royalty, our chief justice or officials, or any of our servants offend in any respect against any man or transgress any of the articles of the peace of this security, and the offense is made known to the 4 of the said 25 barons, remember the royal council, they shall come to us, declare it, and claim immediate redress. This is where we get the right of the people to petition for a redress of their grievances. The 25 barons are the representatives of the people in the king's court. If the king has taken your property unlawfully, if the king is denying you of your rights unlawfully, or a servant is, or someone in the court is, Dutch or Duchess, Duke or Lady or whatever, then you go to your representative, the barons, you present to them your case, the representative takes it to the king, okay?
Wait a minute. I thought Thomas Jefferson invented the redress of grievances. You're telling me it was 600 years before he ever showed up on the scene?
Not 600 years.
Before Jefferson.
500 years. 500 years before Jefferson showed up on the scene.
Okie dokie.
Yeah, there you go. So Thomas Jefferson didn't invent the First Amendment either. He didn't do separation of church and state either. Okay? So, now listen, you are following this redress process now, right? So you've had your rights or your property denied by the central government. Let's just make this,
right.
By the central government. You've gone to your representative, you've made your claim. Now listen to what happens. This is Clause 61. If we make no redress within 40 days, okay, so they have 40 days to respond. And not just simply respond, but to make you whole. 40 days to restore your rights and to restore your property. Just so we're clear.
Due process.
Due process. The 25 barons who may distrain upon and assail us in every way possible, okay, with the support of the whole community of the land. Now that word distrain is a violent taking.
Yeah.
It is a violent seizure.
Seize, to seize.
So if the king does not make you whole, your representatives now have the permission of the king and full right under the law to forcefully seize and assail the king, the crown, the royalty, the family, the servants, with the support of the whole community. And here's what you can do. You can seize their castles, plural, lands, possessions, or anything else, saving only our own person and those of the queen and our children, until they have secured such redress as they have determined upon.
So you can't legally kill them, but you can take their stuff.
You can't kill them, but you can take all their stuff until you are made whole.
And that's from the Magna Carta.
That is from the Magna Carta. Now here's your sheriff. Any man who desires may take an oath to obey the commands of the 25 barons for the achievement of these ends, and to join with them in assailing us to the utmost of his power.
So deputized.
So they are now deputizing, and this will actually now transform over the next centuries into the sheriff, who no longer works for the representatives, but is the representative, right? He doesn't work for the barons, he is the baron.
It's connected to the people. So whereas it started connected to the legislature in what would become the legislature, now he's connected to the people.
Because the people were connected to the legislature, he was connected to the legislature. Now, over the centuries, he is connected directly to the people. But he still holds the same principled authority. And that's exactly what Brad Rogers said. Awesome. To not just protect us from criminals, but to protect us from government that acts like a criminal.
So this is essentially the earliest origins in our legal charter history.
In our legal chartered history,
our founding documents. Because you said, as you mentioned, connected with the history that this happens in, which you gave the other day, was the charter history of our founding documents, of which at least the second is Magna Carta.
Right. Now I do want to show. I want to show you guys this, because this is important, because this is actually not just KrisAnne Holm making in some conjecture based on history. This is what our founders actually used to codify this power in the entity of our sheriff. We have, let me find this right here, but we have James Madison writing in two separate instances in the Federalist Papers, distinguishing out the power of the sheriff and the local government. Oh, here we go. Like I said, this is like a 3-hour class, and I'm giving you the piecemeal of it. So I'm having to go through this a little bit different. Here it is. All right, so the sheriff is established to be supreme within his jurisdiction, okay? Under Federalist 51, James Madison writes this: hence a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different government will control each other at the same time each will be controlled by itself, right? So we're establishing the authority of the local government to control the federal government. Federalist 39 says this: the local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy. I want to repeat that again. The local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy, no more subject within their respective authorities than the general authority is subject to them within their own jurisdiction. Now, to bring that up into 21st century language, let me explain to you what this means. He is saying the federal government can't show up in your... Oh, let me back this up. He is saying your sheriff can't go to Washington, D.C. and enforce the laws of your county in Washington, D.C. And in the same respect, the federal agents can't come into your sheriff's county and enforce federal law, because your sheriff is supreme in his jurisdiction. And what's crazy, JC, I wish that I had a clip. I'm always thinking I need to go and look for these clips. But I remember growing up and watching television shows and movies where the sheriff was and the feds came in and their feds tried to take over, and the sheriff would say, well, you realize this is my jurisdiction now and you don't have any authority here. We used to know that. And I mean, just in the 70s, we knew that.
Right.
30 years later, 40 years later, we've completely forgotten a foundational check and balance, an established protection of the people's power. We've already forgotten that in just 40 years. And now we have sheriffs who think that their only job is to enforce the law, that the federal government is supreme to them. They can't possibly say anything but, they can't even do boo to the federal government, when just 40 years ago we understood what Madison is teaching us right now. And I have to say, it has to be the education system. You cannot change culture that quickly unless you're educating people that that is the correct culture.
Well,
and then toys and money, and you bribe them with grants and you bribe them with toys and you make them sign the mutual jurisdiction agreements so that and then you teach them that it's a promotion to wear a federal badge and have mutual jurisdiction.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned people being unaware, people don't know, forgotten, or what have you, but then at the same time, it's still been reiterated and reconfirmed throughout modern history. It's like we're distracted on so many other things. Like you said, people don't know it because you have what is that, Mac Prinz v. U.S.
Yeah, Mac Prinz v. U.S. where the Supreme Court actually quotes Federalist 51 and Federalist 39
everything you just said.
Confirms everything that I'm saying.
So, and that was I don't remember the year exactly, but that was shortly after the Brady Bill.
Yes, well, it was in response to the Brady Bill.
Post Reagan shooting, then the Brady Bill, and the lawsuit was in response to the Brady Bill, and it was a couple of sheriffs that sued the federal government and Mac Prinz v. U.S. and basically the Supreme Court confirming, agreeing, and hearkening back to this history and saying, the federal government can't come in and make the sheriffs do their bidding. So And they can't use, what was it? They can't, federal government can't co-opt resources and just say, we're going to use this, we're going to do this, and pretty much confirming.
And as Brad Rogers did, obviously, nobody challenged him. He was not taken to the Supreme Court. The federal government didn't buck. He said, you have no authority to issue your warrants without my permission. I mean, the history, the facts, the Supreme Court, they all support this truth. Dragon's Talon says, KrisAnne, why do you think they no longer teach civics in school? Why don't they want young people to know how the things are supposed to work? Mm-hmm. Well, let me answer that question very simply, Dragon's Talon. Because if we were teaching civics and knowing how government was supposed to work, we wouldn't be sitting here today looking at governors doing lockdowns for the flu.
You wouldn't have a podcast.
I wouldn't have a podcast.
There'd be no need.
Yeah, there'd be no need for my podcast.
But they want.
We wouldn't have martial law invoked with the demand of the people.
Yeah.
I mean, I told you this guy on the teleconference call with Rick Scott
begging for
the National Guard to force people to be injected at the grocery store. You wouldn't have that if we'd been teaching civics. Okay? Stop laughing. I want to. Never mind.
Say when.
Say when.
Say when.
I'm your huckleberry.
Yeah.
I'm your huckleberry.
But
you wouldn't have that. So why don't they do this? Because they want to have this.
Right. And that's the thing.
Little fish in big ponds.
What we mentioned.
Getting the opportunity to be sharks.
Yeah, what we mentioned a couple days ago, that the people behind it, they know it, they understand it.
Yeah.
They're not ignorant of it, but they want to keep the masses ignorant of these things. They know these things.
Come on, that was the whole history class that we taught in the history of the Constitution, the lineage of the 5 documents. The kings always knew how to oppress. It's the people that had to learn over and over and over again all about their rights and what you need to do to secure them. And so for me, right, at this point, as I'm watching right now, our pastor friend Eric Hansen texting me saying, starting 5 p.m. tomorrow, they're on complete lockdown in the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
Right? So between now and 5 o'clock tomorrow, everybody's going to die from corona, but at 5 o'clock, we're going to stop it because everybody's stuck at home, right? Well, this wouldn't happen if that were the case.
Yeah, Unique has the concise answer to Dragon's question. Why would masters teach slaves how to free themselves?
That's right. Because we are Americans, and I've taught this so much over the last 10 years. Sometimes, again, I told you guys, sometimes I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I realize not everybody has ever heard what I said. I just hear what I say over and over again, right? It's like, KrisAnne, you're repeating yourself. No, only to yourself you're repeating yourself. But we have to understand something. We are suffering in America from the worst form of slavery possible. Slavery of the mind. They're invisible shackles that we have placed upon ourselves, and they're the most impossible to free ourselves from.
Free your mind,
and the rest will follow.
Yeah. I look at what you're teaching. It's really been an unbroken chain of principles throughout, because a lot of times people roll their eyes and dismiss. You're teaching history and you're teaching this ancient history and old history. What's the point? This is not then, this is now. But you see, and I was just thinking of, you were talking about the religious liberty today, and there was a quote, I think it was Madison, where he's defending religious liberty, and he's comparing it with other freedom concepts.
Conscience is the most sacred of all property. That exercise of that being a natural and unalienable right. To guard a man's house as his castle, to pay public and enforce private debts with the most exact faith, can give no title to invade a man's conscience, which is more sacred than his castle.
Right, and that ties back to, so that it's that the principle that you see that they held consistently. So that one phrase he uses in there, the man's home is his castle, right? This is Madison saying that in what,
1792.
92, but that phrase references back to Edward Coke, right? Jurist Edward Coke, in the midst of where we get the Petition of Right of 1628, where he was the English jurist that, that coined that phrase in a sense, and that continued through that charter history, legal history, became enshrined in our ideology here in the United States, in our system.
Yes.
And so that's the whole thing of why you tie all of this back to history,
right.
to show the origins and basis of why this is true, this is pertinent. It has been true and pertinent for 1,000 years, and it's been here. This is the thing, what I was just saying before. This is the thing. None of this has gone away. It continues to demonstrate
right.
itself, but the enemies of liberty continue to build a system of distraction and distortion and deception,
right.
so that the people don't see
right.
these principles that have continued to be the landmarks of liberty for 1,000 years. That's why KrisAnne Hall teaches the history that she teaches.
Right there. LibertyFirstUniversity.com. That's why they hate me. Because I'm not a political hack. I'm not a wonk.
And because again, they know it, but they don't want the people to know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't want you to see what's there.
Right, right. Well, look, I just want to tell you that as long as the internet is going, we will keep broadcasting. I don't care what they say. You may have to watch us get arrested one day. Mm-hmm. But we will be here broadcasting. We will be here teaching. And I just want to tell you from my heart why. I believe God has called us to this. I think I made that very clear in the very beginning. God has called us to this, and I'm not going to abandon that call. God spoke to me from the very beginning and told me, look, I'm giving you the opportunity that I gave Esther, and you can be this or you can choose not to. But if you choose not to walk in this path that I'm giving you, then I can't make these promises fulfilled for you. And so we will be doing what we're doing. I'm going to be here until they cart me off, because I believe that we are building a foundation for a new generation. We are building the platform for the rebuilding of America. I believe we're in the midst of its tearing down. But I believe that we have to stay true, we have to stay faithful, and we have to build the foundations so that we have something to stand on to rebuild with. You know what's encouraging to me? People now are beginning to question government licensing of their businesses. That was the new epiphany that I'm watching people have. Because the state constitutions most state constitutions do not give the governors access to shut down private business.
Right.
Right? So even in Illinois, where Eric Hansen was telling us that the governor is not saying we're going to come forcefully shut down your business if you don't comply. He's saying I'm going to pull your business license and then we'll shut you down.
So it's a constructive shutdown.
Yeah.
Because it's not
legal.
They know. Once again, another example. They know they don't have the legal authority to do that. But they've entrapped people because we've allowed our liberties to be licensed.
Yes.
And now we operate. That's what you were talking about before. This thing has shown the illusion of our economy. Mm-hmm. I think it's also shown and is showing to a great extent the illusion of our liberty.
Yes.
That we don't recognize how much of our liberty has been given over. We think, oh, we're okay. They haven't outlawed, guns and assembling this and that, but they've licensed it.
Then they do.
So that...
Yeah, because now they're refusing to issue licenses.
Because it can't exist, like we can't function. We can't operate without the license. So
they know they can't
constructively been outlawed.
They can't outlaw your guns, but they can stop issuing licenses, which has the exact same effect.
Right.
Right? And so I had my little victory. Remember, I'm always teaching you, when you're fighting for liberty, you have to look for victory in different places. It's not always going to be obvious, and it's not always going to be personal.
Now, isn't it true, I had this question, isn't it true that the only time we even come close to some authority like this is supposed to be in times of invasion, to repel invasion?
Yeah.
Or rebellion, or unlawful rebellion?
Yeah.
So those are the only instances where we even get close to anything like this.
That's right.
Being authorized.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. But I was, like I said, I had that little personal victory when I started seeing it pop up all over social media and stuff that I'm watching and hearing people talk. Why, if they can't touch my business, why do I have to have permission to do it? Because that's what a license is. Do you realize that a license actually makes the government the owner of your business? And that's what people are seeing.
So I hope the government does pull these licenses then.
I don't own my business. Well, they're already realizing it because they don't want to lose their business, right? Yeah. They don't want to lose their business, so now they're complying with all the recommendations because they are under threat of losing their license. And it's starting to occur to them that through the licensing of my business, I don't own my business. I don't own my business. So that's the crazy thing. People are asking me lots of questions about governors in the chat room. I'm going to tell you, every governor operates differently because every state constitution is different.
But most do not have the authority.
Most do not have the authority to shut down. I mean, even New York doesn't have the authority. California doesn't have the authority. I don't know what else. I mean, California doesn't even have a codification of the right to keep and bear arms in their Bill of Rights. But they don't have the authority to touch private business. I don't think people realize how sacred private business ownership was to our founders. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking about people who either were indentured servants, which means they didn't own the land they worked, or they were chartered landowners, meaning the king owned their land and they just worked for the king. It was huge when you actually came to America and owned your own property. That was something in England that didn't happen. This was enormous, and they never thought it would be something that we would surrender.
Which is why the Constitution makes no provision for suspending. I mean, the Constitution itself saying, here's how you can suspend me. So a provision for suspending liberty. Yes. It's counterintuitive. The whole point of the Constitution. It was the whole point of the war with their own government.
Well, but it was the whole point of writing it down. Right? We're not just going to go along and see how it goes and flow with it. We're writing it down so it'll be on paper so everybody knows the boundaries.
So there's no P.S. in case of emergency.
Yeah.
We don't actually mean anything. We just wrote.
Yeah. No. In case of emergency, light match. Yeah? No, that's not what that means. And even in state governments, all these national emergency police powers, that's what they call them, police powers, are totally invented. Mm-hmm. And they're invented in time of necessity and emergency and then upheld by the judiciary. And this is the crazy thing because, like I said, I've been on the phone with lawyers all day long. We've been searching through these things, looking at these things. What's crazy is they invent them by necessity. They do it on the fly by executive order or some administrative order. The court upholds them, and they never ever write a law. They never amend a constitution. They never actually create legislation to create these powers. They just totally fly. So let me ask you, JC, in my Socratic teacher kind of way, now that they've done this, right, and the courts have said you can do this, why wouldn't they want to amend the Constitution to create a state of emergency clause or put it into writing in the state statutes?
I would think because they don't want the people to actually see it in writing. Most of the people don't comprehend this. They just take it for granted.
Because if they see it in writing, it is forever codified, which means they can go back and look at it in time of peace and say, that's crazy. See, it's the time of necessity that they invent, the panic that makes people think, hey, I need the National Guard at the grocery store to force people to have swabs. If you had said that to that man 6 months ago, I guarantee you he would have like, what? Are you nuts? That's crazy. We'd never do that here in America. Am I right? I'm right. I know I'm right. but you put people in the midst of some kind of crisis, which is why the whole Rahm Emanuel thing comes to work and the rules for radicals things comes to work.
No, if you're scared enough, I can talk you out of anything.
Oh, yeah. Or into anything. Yeah. So, and that's where we are. Hey, I wanted to mention, say hi to Stephanie. Stephanie, formerly known as Stephanie.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so Stephanie was watching today. So
cool.
I just wanted to say hi to our friend Stephanie. It's been a while since we've had a chance to talk to her. But
hope you're doing well. Blessings.
Yeah, she sent me a little message of, preach, sister. So I knew she was watching. But thank you guys so much for joining us here today. We went a little bit long today, but I hope that you found our lesson on the sheriff very important, very critical. Share the lesson on the sheriff. Go to libertyfirstuniversity.com and sign up. So many of you have signed up. Look, don't let the apocalyptic crisis scare you from investing in liberty, okay? Because this is something that is going to last on eternity. The knowledge is. And if you don't want to join Liberty First University, then go online and start reading the Federalist Papers. If you can if you can do that on your own, do it. Read the Anti-Federalist Papers, but don't take this time and waste it. Reach others. Hey, this is a good time to get Liberty First gear. Wear your Socialist t-shirt suck. Socialists suck t-shirt. Wear your Got Liberty t-shirt. Wear your gun t-shirt. Can you imagine in the apocalypse wearing your gun t-shirt? All of these things will help people understand and start the conversation for you to make that happen.
Remember, keep up with your hygiene. Use wisdom.
And touch your face. Just touch your face. That's all you have left. Touch your face. Sovereign Duty is where you'll find the lesson on the sheriff too. Right here. It's on Kindle. It's on Amazon. You can go to Books A Million. You can get it at KrisAnneHall.com. But every sheriff needs this. So thank you guys for your time. God bless. And I'm taking the day off tomorrow. I might even sleep in past 8:30.
Today Friday?
Today is Friday. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time.